the new normal, which is as old as time, but now, of course, well, as always, there are excuses and rationalizations attached to it. Now it is the fact that the current crop of Jews aren't so eager to be slaughtered, so they're fighting back. And yeah, we've seen people who follow Israeli, you know, presence. I think mostly of sports because I follow sports. Israeli teams playing anywhere in Europe get a very special welcome that only they get. Today is the second semifinal of the Eurovision Song Contest. For people who aren't familiar with it, it's a very unique kind of competition that happens in Europe once a year. It's a song contest where each country sends a representative, then countries vote, usually for their BFFs from across the border. Although in Israel's case, it doesn't have BFFs from across the border, so it's a bit different. And yeah, so this is happening tonight, the second semifinal in Malmo in Sweden, and Israel is competing. And the Israeli singer, of course, under heavy security, has been told not to leave her hotel except for when she has to go to rehearsals and the competition. Israelis have been advised not to travel to the competition. And yesterday and today in the rehearsals, the Israeli singer got booed, which is not a thing that happens in Eurovision. This is it's unlike sports where people get booed, even if they're not Jews. This is something that is I've never seen before in Eurovision. Now. Sweden, who is won last year's competition and therefore is hosting this year's competition, is the most probably the most Eurovision frenzied country in Europe, as far as I know. And we have somebody from Sweden here. Now, I have to say, last week I asked Anders after the reality show episode that we did together if he's happy to be on a show about Eurovision, and he said yes. But just so you know, I don't follow what's going on in Sweden, and I don't follow what's going on in Eurovision. And you were born and raised in Sweden, but you left over 30 years ago. So keep that all in mind. But still, Anders, I will go to you first with your thoughts about what's going on specifically with Israel in today in this year's competition.
Yeah, thanks, Razi. Uh, but I still have my contacts in Sweden. So, I did send out a feeler asking, so is the Eurovision Song Contest, has it grown in importance and in interest since I left many years ago? And the answer is yes. So this is indeed a big deal in Sweden these days. And as you mentioned, Sweden won it last year, so they're hosting this year. Now, Israel, I believe, has won it 4 times or something. So, it's not like Europeans in the past have expressed hostility towards Israel like we see today. So Israel has been actually one of the more successful countries in the history of the contest. What's going on right now? I, it's predictable. I'm not surprised. I haven't seen video. I've seen some pictures of demonstrations in Malmo. Doesn't appear to be mass outpouring, but we'll see tonight during the contest. And obviously there is a very high increased police presence. I think they've even brought in police from Denmark and Norway to be able to deal with whatever may happen. And if you look at the history of the contest, there has been political controversy before. So when Turkey attacked Cyprus back in the 70s, I think there was a boycott movement going on. Russia was actually banned a couple of years ago after the invasion of Ukraine. And that led to Russia, I believe, leaving the European Broadcast Union, and membership there is mandatory if you want to participate in the contest. So who knows if and when Russia may come back. But as it goes, I'm not at all surprised by what we see and the booing in the audience. As I know, and probably many in the audience, Malmo is a city in Sweden which a with a very large Muslim population. Sweden received, I think, upwards of 1 million people from the Middle East after this, or during and after the Syria crisis a number of years ago, and that is obviously starting to have an impact, and we'll see if they will take to the streets tonight.
Yeah, yeah. So the European Broadcasting Union, yeah, is the organization that runs it. It's the organization of national broadcasters. I think in all cases they're government broadcasters, right? It's none of them are privately owned. And yeah, we'll talk about Malmo a bit later. I just want to point out a couple of things. So yeah, Turkey had their issues and Russia had their issues. In both cases, it was the aggressor in a war that was frowned upon. Here, it is the side defending itself. And yeah, as for Israel winning, that's a whole other thing. Israel won 4 times. The last the two that happened in my lifetime. The last one was a let's say very large woman singing a feminist anthem basically against men, and the previous one in 1998 was a transgender woman. Transgender woman is somebody who was a man. Yeah. Anyway, so yeah. But yeah, we'll talk more about the details and the technicalities of how voting goes. Michael, I'm not sure if you're in Israel now because I know you split your time between several places, but yeah, you can.
Yeah, Tel Aviv. Yeah, so it's I watch a lot of tennis, and it's really interesting. Russia. There's a lot of tennis players from Russia, and they're really good tennis players. I mean, #2 in the world in the men's, and #1 Sabalenka on the women's, and so on. And because of what's happened, because of what Russia did, which was attack Ukraine and continues to attack Ukraine, and never mind treats its people and its dissidents with very quick decisions, meaning you disagree with Putin and you're dead. That's how it works over there, and pretty much that's how it works in most of the Middle East as well. When you're a dissident, you're gone. So what happens in tennis is that nobody boos anybody. And we appreciate their excellent tennis. And it is true that in almost every tennis tournament, none of which are in Russia, by the way, including in all the ones in Europe, they just don't put that you're from Russia. They just leave your country blank, which of course indicates that you're from Russia, because currently, at least, there's no other country that is where the country is boycotted. And for the few times that I've seen interviews, the tennis players from Russia just try to avoid the whole situation because they're pretty much embarrassed, as best as we can tell, but they can't say anything because they will quickly disappear from the face of the earth, at least from any public situation if they do say anything. The question, I think, really is, we all know why this is happening, because Jews are held to some weird different standard, and it's just convenient to hate them. But the question is, why these people, that some of whom actually do have, presumably are thoughtful people and do have some rationale, what world do they think they're going to be supporting going forward? Let's assume the Jews lose. Let's assume Biden doesn't send any more weapons to Israel, and eventually Hamas recovers, and October 7th, as Hamas has said, will happen over and over and over again. And finally Israel just gives up and all the Jews leave. What's next? Because I'm pretty sure that every Muslim country that's Islamic militants has said that they're not going to stop with the Jews. The next set of countries then the Christians are going to go. And by the way, the Sunnis and the Shias are going to have a civil war. They're already in a civil war. And ironically, in Malmo, you have people that are Syrian refugees with an ongoing crisis in Syria, which is far worse by any number of metrics, including the numbers of dead people. Far, far worse than anything that's happened in Gaza. Never mind the fact that Hamas started it and should be annihilated, end of story. So I just look at this and I don't understand why the world thinks that it's a reasonable position. And when I say thinks it's a reasonable, you don't hear anybody on CNN, for example, jumping up and down and saying, this is ridiculous. First of all, this is a European entertainment conference. We should be focused on their entertainment ability, just like we do in tennis. And second of all, we don't want people to be treated by getting booed when they come in. These are talented folks who've spent pretty much most of their life working really hard to get to where they are. And that's the world. We want to foster excellence and beauty and art and music. But none of that. And let's be very clear. None of the Islamic goals are to foster art and beauty and music. None of them. They are to annihilate anyone who disagrees. You either convert or you die. And you will follow Sharia law or whatever particular sect of crazy Islamic religion there is at the moment. And you'll behave and do whatever the Ayatollah, whoever the leader is. And that's what I think is unfortunate. The West is too asleep and too wimpy. I don't know what else to say about it.
Yeah, True Voice in the chat says Malmo police is expecting 40,000 pro-Palestinian protesters, and I'm guessing that's the day. By the way, if in the UK you can bet on anything, so the betting companies have their the odds on this, and Israel is like 8th to win, so which is surprisingly high. But the way the voting goes in Eurovision is each country gives. The voting has changed, so I'm not sure this is exactly accurate. But people vote. You can call and vote for your favorite song. You vote by country. Each country then gives 12 points to their favorite, the one with the most votes. Then 10 points, 8 points, and I believe then 7, 6, 5, down to 1. And then there's judges voting, which is a different thing that I don't really understand how exactly it works. So yeah, it could be that, I'm wondering if there's kind of enough decent people in each country that people will actually vote for Israel as a even a protest vote, although the song is not bad by Eurovision standards, which is not saying much. Alejandro, you've said that you have watched 3 minutes of Eurovision in your entire life, which some people would say is 4 minutes too much. But yeah, your thoughts based on what you've been seeing, at least from the coverage.
Well, first of all, I think the most relevant things here are, first, as my peers have mentioned, the reaction from the people. And as you mentioned as well, this is a reaction against people who are defending themselves. They didn't start the current conflict. They didn't start what is going on. And this is a war of self-defense, yet they are being booed at stage. But second of all, you have the administrators, the people who are pushing for this event and organizing it. They have been very eager to suppress any political comments, but yet, despite that, they haven't been successful at doing so. And actually, I think I don't follow very often Eurovision, but I think it wouldn't be surprised that this is one of the most politicized versions and editions that it has been in history. So why have they been so unsuccessful? Why haven't they been able to swift the conversation away from that? And that's a good question that maybe my peers will be able to answer better than me. But my impression is that they have been sneaking politics from behind, even though they have been publicly saying that it is not so. Because, as you mentioned, every time that something is winning or something is more or less popular, it's because they are using or passing some parts of the left agenda. And now that it's corrosive, now that it's not that nice to have, or it's very divisive to have some people supporting Israel or not, they have been trying to push it even more, but maybe it's too late for them to have it. So I think that's one of the things that I want to talk about as we move along. And then the last point is the UK representative, which I think his whole reaction to this has been dreadful.
Yeah, we'll talk about the UK representative. We'll talk also about the calls. The calls for boycotting the competition have been going on for many months. And in this first semifinal on Tuesday, so sometimes in a Eurovision, well, always in a Eurovision show, whether it's a semifinal or a final, they have a few songs that are not part of the competition. One of them was a former winner from Sweden who wore the keffiyeh on his as a wristband. Which by the way was, the organizers have tried to avoid, have told people, they won't be allowed in with PLO flag or flags of Palestine as they're now called. What they can't avoid obviously is somebody just when they go on stage doing something, and of course they can't prevent people from booing. Anders, again with the qualifier that you left Sweden long ago, Malmo. So Malmo is, I think, the place where most of the immigrants from Arab countries ended up, or at least the largest immigrant population. If I'm not mistaken, it's considered the most hostile city for Jews in Europe. What can you tell us about Malmo, as far as you know, what it is now, and what actually, if you can compare it to back when you did live in Sweden, and what was it like?
Yes, so historically, Malmo is the third largest city in Sweden. I think it has about a quarter of a million people to 300,000 or something in that neighborhood. It has always been it was traditionally an old industrial city, big shipyards, went through a period of decline, you can say, in the 60s and the 70s, when we saw a lot of this type of industrial capacity moving offshore and such. And I think really only regained its footing in the last 20 years or so. And then you had the surge of immigrants coming in. Even before that, there are neighborhoods in Malmo that are known or have a reputation for similar to on a much smaller scale, but the French banlieues, where you have Muslim concentration of people. I honestly don't know what the Swedes have done to learn from that experience from back in the 70s and 80s. So others would probably be able to comment better on that than I do. But I know that it is a hotbed for Muslim agitation, and it is a problem. And there is one of the Swedish parties. Their right-wing populist party has built a lot of their following on anti-immigrant resentments, and a lot of that is centered around what's been going on in Malmo and in the suburbs of Stockholm and some other major cities.
Yeah, there was a comment somewhere in the chat saying they're importing protesters from Denmark, which I don't see why they would need to. But Malmo is very close to Copenhagen. There's this beautiful bridge connecting the two, and it's kind of, I remember visiting Copenhagen around the time when there were all the immigrants or refugees coming. Coming to mostly Sweden, I think, and Germany, it's interesting to see how these cities are changing, because their approach is kind of inviting people to come in without inviting them to embrace the local culture, the better aspects of the local culture, but rather in the name of multiculturalism, saying you can come in and live as you lived in whatever primitive hellhole you came from, and it doesn't seem to be working out very well.
And
Michael,
just to put things in perspective for your audience, so Sweden is a country of around 10 million people. So adding a million, that would be like having 6 million people coming in the span of a year or two into Great Britain or France. 10 million to Germany, 30 million in the United States. So it's a massive increase and put a lot of pressure on Swedish society.
yeah, and Sweden also, while so-called socialists in the West like to give Sweden as an example for socialism, it's not actually a socialist country, but it is a country with a big welfare state. It kind of focuses on the welfare state much more than others. And yeah, when you have many people coming in and many of them there to take advantage of the welfare state, that also puts kind of a pressure on it. Michael, so in Israel, how are people looking at generally at Malmo and how places like Malmo have changed, and how are they looking at it also in the context of now this is what happens when an Israeli representative representing Israel in a competition shows up in a place like Malmo?
Yeah, look, I can't really speak to the, to Israelis in general. I have a few people I've talked to. I mean, frankly, all my friends mostly talk to me about the college campuses and what the heck's going on with America and why our college campuses are this way. And remarkably, they never hear about any of the so-called red states where the college campuses are fine and the graduations are all going on just normally. Because it's remarkable when you tell children that the police are going to come and remove them, they actually behave in the red states. In the blue states, okay, it's a different story. And then, they're all pretty, today, I mean, it was going to be about Eurovision, but, the 5 or 6 Israelis that I ran into today that I spoke with, all were about Biden and why are we shutting off weapons to finish the job here? And does he want Hamas to win? And does he want Hamas to live? And what the heck is going on? And so on. Prior to this, the discussions about Eurovision, I think the Israelis are just dismayed. I think they are. Look, they're resilient people. I think they really feel like, especially today with Biden, I think they feel like America was sort of the last friend. And Europe has always been kind of this very up and down friend with them, and never really for them. And it felt like the Europe was kind of for them only because it was sort of the right thing to do because our values are much more similar. But Europe loves to beat up and complain about America because, quote, we work too hard. And so on. I mean, it's very interesting, the relationship between countries. But I think now Israel is feeling extremely isolated. And I say to them, look, us Jews, and I'm talking about Jews also in America, you better frickin' wake up because Jews are so busy defending everybody else. And Jews have the same attitude about letting people be refugees from every other country as well. I mean, Jews are idiots when it comes to the reality of what it means to bring in, as you say, Anders, 15% of your population is now suddenly going to be another group of people. American Jews are the same idiots, that they are sometimes here about just thinking about hope. And hope is not, as we say in business, hope is not a strategy, right? You have to be honest about what people are bringing to the table. And people that are most current destitute refugees from countries, unfortunately, like most of the Middle East, and frankly, the refugees we're getting mostly from the southern border. These are not doctors, lawyers, professionals. They're not. And they're not bringing a lot to the table. Now, if you're liberal and democratic and you want to take care of the whole world, fine. But we all know there ain't enough money and resources to go around and take care of the whole world. It's never going to get fixed, especially when the people coming over to you leave their horrible country, as you say, Razi, and they actually want to recapitulate their horrible country using your money and your resources in the new country. because that's what's happening. And the problem, and even Israel has had a great deal of trouble with this notion, especially the center left, which is pretty much considered the left in Israel, but it's center left. They just don't get it. They're starting to get it, and they're getting it the hard way. And if we in the West don't wake up, across all of the West and Israel, don't wake up and start to understand that we don't have enough resources to take care of the entire world, and we better get our own crap together before we start to try to fix others. And if people want to come to our country and they want to shout death to Israel or death to America, maybe they should go back. Not maybe, they should go back. And we need to take a stand. Just like they take a stand, we need to take a stand. I think Israelis are, to conclude, I think Israelis are feeling extremely isolated. They know they're right, and of course they're right. They can do the extrapolation. And I think they've pretty much given up on most of the rest of the world, which frankly will help Israel, I believe.
So I do want to push back on some of that. So I definitely agree. Yeah, if you have masses of people who really are there, first of all, are there to take take advantage of your welfare system. One thing I would like to see, although I would be happy if welfare was abolished altogether, is to have sort of an immigration system where they say you can come in, but you can't get welfare ever. That's a part of the deal. This is it. Like, you can come in. On the other hand, if people are coming, and you gave the example of the U.S. southern border, are coming and they're gonna be working at McDonald's, I think that's a good thing. If they are actually going to, do that and are there for a better life, because working at McDonald's could be a better life than whatever you have in some other country south of the border.
Yeah, just to quickly respond, I think you'd probably agree that they probably ought to register when they come in, probably ought to do it legally the way every other immigrant has had to. One of the great ironies in America, and I know we're off topic a little bit, I think it's relevant, is that much of the Latino population in many states, especially those affected most by the border, are actually against illegal immigration. Imagine that. They're against illegal immigration because they think there should be legal immigration, just like they had to go through and register and so on. And they have to, and if you work, you got to pay taxes, you got to be part of the system. And if you're a low wage earner, you pay very little or no taxes. And if you're a high wage earner, you pay a lot more. It's really not that difficult in its bold concepts until you start to conflate a lot of these issues.
All right, Alejandro, I'm not going to do the thing I've done before with shows where you were on, where I, typecast you as from Mexico and ask you about immigration. But if you want to comment on it, go ahead. I do want to ask you about the UK representative to Eurovision, because that was a unique situation of trying to kind of take a stand without really taking a stand.
Let's return to topic. What's the thing about the UK that you want to?
So you mentioned the UK representative. By the way, the UK historically does very bad in Eurovision, although I think a couple of years ago they did okay. They came in second. But yeah, the UK representative, when there were calls for the UK to boycott this year's Eurovision because Israel is taking part, he made some statement that I don't remember what exactly it was, but it was anti-Israel but pro him taking part in Eurovision.
Yes, and we discussed it. If I remember correctly, it was in December of last year. It was Queers for Palestine, I think. No, sorry, it was another group. I think London, something about London, We for London, something like that. And one of the features that they came over with, aside of the classic statements about apartheid and so on, is that they, for the first time, released the word pinkwashing, which, in my view, and one of the things that we discussed back then, is how an anti-concept it is, and how it tries to move away the conversation and try to remove the thoughtful objections about rights in the Middle East away from the conversation. Like, oh, are you pinkwashing the thing? Are you saying that you're saying that LGBTQ rights are way much better preserved in Israel than in the Middle East? But that's just pinkwashing. You're not taking into account colonization and so on. Therefore, don't bring this objection against me. Don't you want to be pinkwashing? So I think that was the most relevant thing back then. However, now that things have progressed and that Israel wasn't removed from Eurovision, maybe someone should have expected that Oli Alexander, which is the representative of that signed this letter, would have is one of the signers of this letter, would have maybe renounced or quit the to the show or to Eurovision, and he was asked to, not by the representatives of Eurovision or by the representatives of Israel, but by some organizations, LGBTQ organizations, and he said no. So on the one hand, I think this speaks on how people can talk about things and sign things as long as they don't imply any cost on their professional career or on their money. But whenever whenever putting money when their mouth is, whenever they have an instance of that, they won't do it. And his excuse, if you read it in Twitter, was such a disgrace insofar as it's very shallow and lacks of any content. It essentially brings up the fact that because he's participating in Eurovision, he's able to bring the message further. I don't know which message, if he isn't able to, in reality, talk about politics in the show. So I think it's very hypocritical from his behalf and very, very shallow and very, very stupid. And it's really disgusting that someone like that is representing the UK when he doesn't at all seems to represent anyone that I've met here.
So pinkwashing is what? Pretending that a country with like pride parades and gay bars and refugee status for you know, people who are gay from the other side is somehow a better place to be gay in than a place where you get executed for the crime of homosexuality. Is that what pinkwashing essentially is?
Well, it's as any anti-concept is a very ill-defined word that usually brings up a connotation rather than denotation, and usually the connotation is negative, and it's used usually as a slander to avoid discussing a genuine fact. And so, yeah, they bring it as a way to move away the discussion of rights from the discussion, but in reality, and if you ask me, I don't think it denotes anything in particular.
Thank you, Bob with Hat, for the super chat. Bob says, queers for Palestine equals chickens for KFC. So I've said I don't like that comparison because those chickens would not be alive if it was not for KFC. Like, you know, KFC is the reason, and people consume it. Also, they're chickens. It's not like humans. Just in terms of the it was queers for Palestine, Alejandro. I looked it up. This is from an article in the Independent titled "Why is Israel Competing in the Eurovision Song Contest 2024?" Yeah, the Independent is always you can always trust them to not like the Jews. So it says in April, the collective Queers for Palestine circulated an open letter signed by actors India Moore, Bridget Lundy Payne, and Maxine Peake, calling for UK entrant Ollie Alexander to withdraw from Eurovision 2024 in protest against Israel's participation. Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult not to think of the irony when you hear of this organization in its name. Anders, I wonder, Sweden has, in terms of kind of being socially liberal, has been kind of better, I think, than most Western countries, or better and earlier as well, including accepting people's sexual orientations, including women's I don't like the term women's rights, but applying individual rights to women as well. And it seems that this the influx of people from the Middle East, that might they probably have different views, and again, they don't want to change their views on that. Do you know if that has had any effect? I'm also guessing that of the 40,000 protesters that are expected, not many are like regular Eurovision fans, but that's just maybe my bias. But yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, but first I want to correct you on something you said earlier. You said that Britain hasn't had much success in the Eurovision Song Contest. And actually, Britain has won 5 times with such memorable songs as Puppet on a String, Boom Boom, Bang Bang, Save Your Kisses for Me, and Making Your Mind Up, for example. So don't downplay the success of the UK.
It could be that just I'm thinking about more recent years. I don't know when how many of these
No,
were.
the last one was 97. So
Yeah. Yeah,
been a while.
and Britain also has this kind of tradition in the past few decades of finishing last, like or close to last. So maybe that's why I think of that. But yeah.
Yeah, you have a recency bias there, probably. Yeah, it's. But anyhow, so back to your question. So Sweden and this influx of immigrants. Now, this is not the first wave of immigrants at all. Sweden has had several waves of immigrants over the 20th century. Being one of the more prosperous countries in Europe, there was in the 1930s, or I think it was even before, where we had a wave of Italians coming. Then there was a wave of Finns in the 1950s. And after that, a fairly large immigration from Turkey. So there have been multiple waves that has so many, especially Americans, they think of Scandinavians as and Swedes as this blonde homogeneous society, and that's really a myth and has been a myth for a very long time. So in that sense, another wave of immigrants is nothing new to Sweden. I think it's the size of it and how quickly it happened that was indeed new, because it was just in the span of a couple of years that this 1 million Syrian refugees or Middle Eastern refugees arrived and were accommodated. And I think that it's very much putting the Swedish society to a test. And as you say, it's a very ingrained welfare state. Nobody's really questioning the welfare state as such. The fact that Sweden has been able to afford it is that Sweden got rich before they implemented the welfare state. That's something for every country to remember who is thinking of a welfare state. Get rich first. It was actually for the longest time up till the 1950s, it was one of the second or third freest country in the world, because although the social democrats of Sweden, they were really more, in terms of their implementation, more on the right end of the political spectrum, because they realized from the very beginning that they depended on Swedish industry, excuse me, to provide employment, to pay taxes, and so on and so forth. And that's why historically you can see that Sweden is overrepresented in terms of big companies. Nowadays, not so much. Spotify being the only exception. But yeah, so Sweden got rich first. They could accommodate a lot of that initial, those earlier waves of immigration was because of labor shortages. Now, so that is another difference this time around. And I do believe that it drove up unemployment. And then, of course, with the welfare state in place, you're giving people money, all the traditional problems. You don't force them to get out and work right away. And Sweden, as one result, not only of this most recent immigration wave, but over the last 20 years, you have a huge gang problem where Middle Eastern gangs, you have Eastern European gangs, drug-related and such. And I think that is, together with immigration as such, that is driving the populism that we now see increasing in Sweden. And the Swedish Democrats, I haven't looked recently, but they're pretty prominent in terms of the share of the vote that they attract in recent elections. It's not as bad as in some of the Eastern European countries, obviously Hungary, Slovakia, such, but it's the trajectory is not very promising.
Yeah, and you mentioned Sweden had, there was in the past, it was much more free market oriented. I think it was the 1950s. I read about this a few years ago. It was the 1950s, I think, in particular, that were Sweden was very free. And if you look at some of these big brands that we all know, like IKEA and H&M and Scania and Volvo, and there are others that aren't coming to mind at the moment, but so many of them started in the 1950s, which would be, we talk in this channel sometimes about the practical case for capitalism has been made so many times, and it unfortunately doesn't work. People look at it and sometimes just you need more than that to have it adopted and have it last. So other than Eurovision, there are other competitions of different sorts. So I mentioned, I follow sports. The Olympics are happening in Paris in a couple of months. There are going to be Israelis competing in different competitions. The particular interest to me is the football team, or soccer for our American audience. Israel qualified for that for the first time since the 1970s. It's a very big deal. There's a very good team because it's under 23s, and Israel's under 23s are very good. It's I think there's 8 teams in the tournament. There's a real chance of qualifying, and Paris is pretty close to me. I really would have liked to go to some of Israel's matches. I don't feel safe doing so. Certainly not going to Paris, draped in an Israeli flag as I would if I went to such a match. Michael, to what extent, again, you being there and knowing people in Israel, to what extent are people thinking in that way about travel in general, about the danger of being identified as Israeli and what might happen if that happens?
It's very prominent. There used to be a good deal of travel, for instance, between Israel and Turkey. We have a lot of Turkish Airways flights from Israel that are still flying, but nobody's staying in Istanbul anymore. Nobody wants to stay in Turkey for obvious reasons. Erdogan doesn't want us. We don't want him. And they're definitely thinking about that. I'm chairman of a board in Europe. I don't want to get into too much detail because it's trackable, but I don't go to that country anymore now in person because it's not clear to me that it's safe. And I have an American passport. I'm a dual citizen, and I would only use the American passport, of course, but I will be getting off a flight in general. I'll be getting off a flight from Israel. I know a lot of my friends who are planning trips, who traveled during this recent holiday of Passover, definitely selected their locations much more carefully. I know a few that actually changed which American city they were going to because of a lot of them that were going to go to New York changed to Miami. I know that some of them that were going to go to LA changed to the East Coast, primarily Miami. some New York, but they got out of New York pretty quickly and moved over to either Connecticut or up to Pennsylvania. It's a big issue, and it's really again, I go back to this notion of when you look at what they're screaming about and what they're protesting and what they pretend to stand for, you have to extrapolate it. I mean, it's a little like treating disease. You got to treat the acute problem, but you also got to think about what's going to happen down the line. And I just don't really understand. Mostly I'm disappointed in the complete lack of leadership anywhere amongst almost any political spectrum nowadays. Lack of leadership to provide a vision for the kind of society we want to live in, which is basically a free society that's tolerant, and you leave me alone, I leave you alone, and if we have stuff in common, we spend time together, and if we don't, we get out of each other's hair. And that's not the society that any of our leaders are actually trying to push, in my opinion. I'm not talking about tolerance in terms of kumbaya, I'm talking about basic human rights, life and liberty and pursuit of happiness. And by the way, when you are infringing on my liberty, you have committed a crime. And I think to some extent, think about going to other countries. The tourism was good. Israelis love to travel. They're not traveling to these countries anymore, and that's because their liberty is at stake.
Yeah, you mentioned Turkey, and I remember, I think it was you who said on a past episode that Jews want to be liked kind of too much, and to the point where they'll sometimes lie to themselves about not being disliked as much as they are. And yeah, for me, Turkey has been a problem for a long time. And when I want to travel to Israel, if I look up tickets, the cheapest ones are always through Turkey. And as far as I'm concerned, I'd rather not go than fly through Turkey, and give my money to the Turkish government. That's two things I really don't want to do. And yeah, in terms of choosing where they go to in America, I was in Palo Alto, California a few months ago. I had a meeting with someone, and then he says, "Do you want to go? Do you want to go to Stanford? I'll show you around, and I'll show you." And then he showed me this encampment that was already there. It wasn't as big or as violent as it turned out to be later, but they were there from October. They were there like immediately, as soon as the mass murder by the Palestinians happened. They went out to show their support. And yeah, this is what Israelis and Jews deal with wherever they go.
If I can just add, Razi, sorry to belabor, but I think it's important to remember that most Middle Eastern countries now have expelled most of the Christians. And it is shocking to me. You have all kinds of people like Biden and his whole entire group that are sort of tacitly defending these countries, and the Christians have been expelled. They're mostly gone from Lebanon. There are not any Christians that I know of in Syria. The Jews have been gone for a long time. The Jews were expelled a long time ago, and that was fine. Nobody complains about that. But even look at the Christians. And Western Europe is mostly Christian, right? I mean, it's pretty much all Christian as far as I'm aware. And yet they don't seem to get it where this is headed. The people in these countries, the Muslims, most of them, want to establish complete caliphates where you either agree or you die or you leave. But preferably you die, because we want to take over the whole world. And they've said it. They have proclamations on it. It's just unbelievable to me how somehow that's all okay. And Hamas's proclamation is that Israel no longer exists, and that's all okay, because we don't really believe that. Well, you ought to. And the Christians themselves are up next and have been in the spotlight for a long time. And they're the ones that are tacitly and passively and with their actions supporting Hamas.
Yeah, well, as James Valiant reminded us yesterday on the Daily Objective, there was Biden did express his agreement with Chuck Schumer when Chuck Schumer called for regime change for one Middle Eastern country. So maybe maybe that's a start. Let's see if any other Middle Eastern countries follow. I'm going to be skeptical about that happening. But yeah, it is it is interesting, let's put it that way, times that we live in. Alejandro, are you gonna increase your overall Eurovision viewership time in either today or on Saturday?
Sadly, no. I don't watch live TV. I'm boycotting the BBC from all my life, so I refuse to pay the TV license, and I think I'll have to see what happens from written news.
Well, you are invited to our Eurovision watch party if you want. We won't charge you the share of the TV license. It's on Saturday. It's only for the final. Uh, but yeah, there was something else that you wanted to bring up before, other than the Queers for Palestine protest, and I think I missed it.
I don't think so. I think I've already talked about everything.
Cool. Well, Anders, any other thoughts about what we could expect to see, or any of the other topics that we talked about?
No, not really. We'll see if the 40,000 that I think one of your listeners mentioned, if that comes to fruition, and hopefully the Swedish police will have their act together and put anything down that is turning into violence.
Yeah, and look, so many of these protests are turning, into violence. It's not accidental that people who are protesting for those who are violent, for those who are the initiators of force, happen to, in many cases, be initiators of force as well. Look, if it's 40,000 people, there are those among them who will want to act. Yeah, let's hope that the police can do their job. And let's hope that, again, none of the people who actually make it into the arena are able to do anything. But this is a scary time. It's also it's you have to think about the girl singing the song and going on the biggest stage of her life being booed because of where she's from. That's being generous to the protesters and saying where she's from. But yeah, she is, she's going to go through, not an easy time. From the reports that I've seen, she keeps a smile on her face, and but it can't possibly be easy uh, to be in this really unique position in a competition that happens every year. I don't know. We maybe can research it. I don't know if it has ever happened that somebody gets booed during their song, like as soon as they get on stage, and then when they get off the stage. This happened in the rehearsals twice, and it will be very, very likely happening tonight when she gets on stage.
Do you know if there is anywhere on social media you can go to offer your support for her? Cheer on.
I don't know of her social media presence. What we can do, Daniel, if you can find it in the last few minutes of, I don't actually know if we have this yet, but if you can post the number that people can call if they want to vote for Israel. And by the way, you can't vote yet, but there basically you have to hear all the songs, and then there's voting, and then the voting closes, and then they announce the 10 countries that make it to the final, and then the same thing happens during the final. So yeah, if we can't find that number now, then we can try to find it. Voting does cost money, by the way, but I don't think it was. I don't remember how much it was, but it wasn't very pricey. Thank you, Bob with Hat, for the super chat. Bob says, honestly, I'm just tired of all the hate towards me and my kind. Stop caring about it. Want to kill me? Try it. Otherwise, fuck off. Enjoy Eurovision. Thanks for that. Michael, any parting thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, I think that's what the Jews have got to wake up to. It's as Machiavelli said, it's better to be feared than loved, and we are clearly not loved. So we better get over on defending ourselves and making sure that we can protect ourselves in Israel. Since the United States seems to be in trouble, and Europe is always a bit shaky, in my opinion.
Alejandro,
No, thank you.
Anders?
No, thanks.
All right. Well, I don't think we have the phone number. I don't know if they release it, if it changes every year. I haven't actually been paying that close. I've been paying more attention than Alejandro has, but not enough to know that number off the top of my head. But yeah, it's it's also a good song, which again is not, considering the type of songs you hear in Eurovision, not that much of an achievement. But yeah, let's hope that the people who are booing have something extra to boo about tonight and on Saturday. Thanks, guys, for joining me. Quickly, where can people find more of your work, Anders?
You can go to my Substack page. No, it's sorry, andersingemarsson.substack.com, or you can check me out on thinkrightOrWrong.com. One word.
Michael?
LinkedIn, Michael Kaufman, 2 Fs.
Alejandro?
You can check the playlist of essays that James Valiant and I did back in the past. You can see it in this channel. So
I'm Razi Ginzberg on X. I will also be back tomorrow on the Daily Objective. I will be interviewing Robert Spencer of Jihad Watch. That is going to be good. Make sure you tune in for that tomorrow on the reality show, Why Pro-Palestinian Protesters Are Hamas. If you think this content is valuable, like it, share it, comment, and of course, consider becoming a member and supporting our work. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll see you back here tomorrow.